Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2001 Nickelodeon animated film, Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius. Now, Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius is a film that initially was going to be the pilot for the TV show of the same name. But the producers and the studio execs at Nickelodeon were so impressed by what Jimmy Neutron's creators had put together in terms of test footage that they decided to change their plans. And they decided to make this into a feature film and then develop a TV show afterwards, which in hindsight is a pretty bold move if you think about it. Because what if this movie tanked? What if this movie was a flop? Then no one's going to want to watch the show. So that was definitely a risk on Nickelodeon's part, but it wound up paying off because they only spent $30 million on it and it made over $100 million worldwide in the box office. Now, what's funny about this is that I did not know for years that this was something that occurred before the TV show. I just assumed that it was something that came out in theaters in the middle of the show's run after the show had already become a hit. But that's not the case at all. This came out first. So, yeah, that was definitely something that surprised me when I found that out years ago. Because I never thought that when I was a kid, when I was watching this show on Nickelodeon. Because I will admit, Jimmy Neutron was one of my favorite shows on Nickelodeon growing up. So that was definitely something that kind of threw me for a loop. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the film, though, I would like to give a special shout out to Sean for requesting yet another review. Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, is directed by John A. Davis, who is also the creator of Jimmy Neutron. This is very much his baby. He had been trying to get this particular project off the ground since the 90s. He initially had some plans to make it into a live action film or a live action franchise. And that was, I think, when it was under the title like Johnny Quasar or something. But then he decided to go a different direction because it would be too expensive to make it into a live action project. So he decided to change his sights and flip his mindset towards the realm of animation, in particular computer animation. Because computer animation around this time in the 90s, at the mid to late 90s, was really becoming something that was a lot more affordable for people to utilize or work with in the animation field, and something you could get a pretty decent product out of in a shorter amount of time in comparison to traditional hand-drawn animation. So Davis is one of the pioneers in that field for television, because prior to Jimmy Neutron, I can't think of that many completely CGI animated shows other than maybe Reboot or something, or parts of Beast Wars. Well, I think Beast Wars is mostly computer animated, but the animation in Jimmy Neutron was way better. But yeah, I think he's definitely a pioneer when it comes to that, and I think it's really cool that he was able to convince Nickelodeon to give him all this money and make his debut version of this character in this franchise a feature film. And even though the film as a whole, I'm not super big on, I got to be honest here. I just thought this was a pretty average animated kids movie. I do have a lot of admiration and appreciation for all the work that Davis and his crew put into it. And I think Davis's direction is really good. I think for a children's animated CGI movie, it's definitely got a lot of spark to it. fair amount of spunk. It's definitely something that I think has a firm grasp on style and flair and certain kinds of camera angles and movements to really emphasize the animation and make it look less rigid or less stiff, and also play around with um, the ability to be able to use more ambitious backgrounds and some of these other things that traditional animation wouldn't necessarily be able to do in the same capacity. So this is definitely a film direction wise, which is a little risky. It does take a little bit more chances with the types of shots that he utilizes, some POV shots, and some really unique angles at points. And it really does make the film look quite good and gives it a certain fun vibe and overall feel to it and even a bit of spectacle at points, I have to be honest. So yeah, I definitely feel Davis did a really good job directing this. The screenplay by Davis, David N. Weiss, J. David Stem, and Steve Odekirk. This is a script that really does feel like it was intended for a pilot for a TV show. And that comes with some positives, but it also comes with some pretty distinct negatives. Because this was never intended to be a theatrical film from the beginning. So it has a certain aspect of its writing that's really trying to establish a TV show and the dynamics between characters and a whole cast, and not necessarily something that I would consider to be like a complete feature film screenplay. You can definitely tell that there's a lot of stuff that was just kind of added in there, some ideas that were thrown around, and I think because it's a feature film, it enabled the film to do more than it probably would have been able to do on the smaller scale. But I also feel that that kind of hurts it a little bit because I think this is something that would work even better as a pilot, as an hour-long pilot of the show, because that way you're not spending too long with a pretty big cast of characters trying to establish them, and the pacing is stronger. And I just think there's a lot of things that the show would have done differently in comparison to a film, because there's certain things you can do with a show to cater to a specific audience that you're not really going to do with a movie because you're trying to appeal to the widest audience possible. So you can't be as niche. So I think that leads to some of the humor and some of the comedy not being as oddball and as daring as it would be in the show. Uh, and I don't mind the idea of like a parody of an alien invasion, but that's also a concept that's just honestly kind of overdone, even at this point in 2001. The idea of something that's like a take on Invaders from Mars or Mars Attacks or something along those lines, but for kids, that was kind of a played out concept. And it definitely feels a little stale here. The aliens, they're really boring design wise. They're just a bunch of green goo in egg containers. That's really it. So they're not that interesting design wise. Their whole plot, their whole plan is rather dumb and doesn't really make a whole lick of sense. But that's kind of the norm for Jimmy Neutron. There's a lot of plots in that show that don't make any damn sense. Uh, and I do feel that the fact that it's trying to establish an entire classroom of kids really does hurt it in terms of the dynamics between the characters or the character development. It would have been a lot better to me if it focused more on just a smaller cast of characters, not an entire class. Just focus on Jimmy, Carl, um, and some other people, like Cindy and Sheen. That's fine. You don't need Nick. You don't need the rest of the cast. You don't need the rest of the kids. You don't need the teachers to get involved that much. Really just focus more on that group of kids. The parents, it's all right to focus on them a little bit because you want to establish a little bit of sympathy for when they get taken by the aliens. But I still wouldn't focus a ton on them either. And I would honestly get the kids on the alien planet sooner and then have them just interact with the different environment, try to come up with a plan to save their parents, maybe encounter different types of alien life forms on the planet, maybe prisoners or something. Maybe they befriend one of the aliens, something along those lines. And I think that would have been a lot more effective than just a group of kids who don't have that much time to really provide them with that much depth, and then they all fly off into space, and then it just kind of devolves into this just chaotic mess of a climax where the kids are doing their thing and some of the kids get captured, and then there's the egg people, and then there's this giant alien bird, and then Jimmy Neutron using his shrink ray. And I will give the screenwriters this: they did a really good job incorporating the different types of gadgets that Jimmy utilizes throughout the film, and that's really where I have a lot of fun with the movie, is the different types of gadgets that Jimmy Neutron uses throughout the movie, as well as the dynamics between Jimmy and Sheen and Carl. Like the three of them are really strong together. But I also think Cindy has her moments too, and I really like the stuff with Jimmy and Cindy and how they kind of had a bit of a reluctant friendship at some point, and there was an interesting dynamic that was forming between the two, but it didn't really go that far with it. And I felt that was a little bit of a missed opportunity when it comes to the writing. And I have to be honest, it is very much a film for kids. So as an adult, a lot of the sophomoric, juvenile attempts at comedy just came across as really dumb and flat for me. Uh, and this is a movie that, in a lot of ways, features a script with dialogue and moments that are just really daft and really dumb and silly, but not always necessarily in the best way. Silly and honestly almost a cringe way. So it's one of those scripts that I feel it really would have worked a lot better as a pilot. I strongly feel that way about it. I really do. A lot of the things that it does right, it could have done just as well, if not even better, with a TV pilot. And the fact that it doesn't really take the extra time to expand upon the characters that much, except for maybe a little bit, really makes it feel like the screenwriters didn't really do that much with the opportunity that they were given. It's like, okay, you're making a feature film now. You don't have to follow the same rules that you would on a TV show. You don't have the same limitations, so you can be a little bit more out there. You can do more. You can have more character development. You have the time to do that, and it never really did that. Also, the villains were just really silly and goofy and kind of annoying. They really reminded me of the aliens at the end of Explorers, which is not a good thing at all. Especially Martin Short's character, who I love him. He's one of my favorite comedic actors, but I hated his character in this of Ublar. But yeah, I've seen worse kids movies. I've definitely seen worse scripts for kids movies, but I definitely feel this could have been even more creative. It could have been even more interesting, and it could have been more compelling. And I really do feel that there are singular episodes of the show that are considerably better than the movie. The voice cast, though, definitely not the problem. I mean, the voice cast is really good. I mean, Debi Derryberry as Jimmy Neutron, she's just great in this role. It's one of her best roles, and it's one of her most iconic for a reason. She does a really good job channeling Jimmy's insecurities and Jimmy's cockiness and just Jimmy's overall personality and how he can be charming while still being really dorky. And then you have um, Carolyn Lawrence, who did some good work as Jimmy's nemesis, Cindy Vortex. Rob Paulsen was hilarious as Carl. Jeffrey Garcia was also really fun as Sheen. Um, you also had some fun performances by a few other voice actors. Some of them were kind of surprising. I mean, Patrick Stewart as the evil King Gubat the Fifth. It was fun to hear Patrick Stewart just play a silly character like that. But I definitely feel that the script kind of let him down a little bit because I don't think he really was given the best material to work with. Same thing goes for Martin Short, who I think they just let him improvise and just do random shit throughout the movie. And sometimes it worked, but most of the time it didn't. I think Martin Short is that kind of comedian who he can do improv, but I think he's better when he's dealing with scripted material. That's just me personally. I know a lot of people disagree when it comes to Martin, but I think when Martin is just let loose, he can be a little too much. And I think that's definitely the case here as Ublar. I didn't really care for Nick Dean as a character, but it's not Milo's fault or anything. Um, the voice actresses who played, the voice actors who played the parents, they did some good work. Like Megan Kavanaugh as Judy, Mark DiCarlo who voiced Hugh, Jimmy's dad. But yeah, it's not what I would consider to be like the most spectacular cast ever. Like it's not. I mean, there are other animated films that probably have more well-known, well-renowned cast members, but it's a really solid cast regardless. Despite having some disappointing efforts by some of the more well-known names in the cast. The editing by John Price and Gregory Perler, I thought was pretty good. For the most part, I don't think it was spectacular or anything, but I definitely felt that it fit the overall tone and the vibe of the movie pretty well. The music by John Debney is not really what I would consider to be some of his finest or his best work, but it's another thing that works for the movie and it's fitting and it's got a good sense of mirth and magic to it at points, but it's just kind of generic sounding, I have to be honest. And the animation, for the limitations of the time, considering the fact that it's CGI animation from the early 2000s, there are some moments where it does not hold up at all. But there are some other moments where it surprisingly looks pretty good. And I think the fact that the whole style of the film and the style of the show was more stylized, it was more cartoonish. I think that definitely worked in its favor because if it was more photorealistic, it was trying to look more like reality or the real thing, then it would get the uncanny valley look to it. But Jimmy Neutron isn't doing that. So because of the fact that it's a cartoon and it has a cartoon style, the dated CGI doesn't really hurt or hamper the film that much. And I think because it's computer generated, the stuff that it's able to do with Jimmy's inventions, with the sci-fi elements, with Goddard, Jimmy's pet robot dog, and all the spaceships and all that stuff like that. There's a lot of things that it can do animation wise in certain ways that wouldn't really be as possible or wouldn't really work as well with a different form of animation. So, despite the limitations of this kind of animation, I think the film works around them well enough that the 2000s era CGI isn't really something that hurts Jimmy Neutron. It isn't something that makes Jimmy Neutron some kind of dated relic of the past. I think it still works, and I think it's effective and efficient in its own way. So yeah, this is a film that I mean, I understand why it has its fans. I understand why fans of the show really like it, but I can also understand why fans of the show don't like it as much as the show itself, because this is really the beginning of things. We're starting the franchise. We're trying, a lot of the film is just trying to feel things out, just trying to figure out exactly what is going to make Jimmy Neutron into what at the time was very much a household name, because the show then went on to become one of Nickelodeon's most popular and one of their biggest hits. I mean, it went on to have its own theme park ride at Universal Studios. I mean, it this was not an IP that was a cult hit by any means, or just some kind of fringe success. Like, no, and it's evident by the way that this film was an immediate success, critically and financially, for Nickelodeon. So I personally still prefer the TV show, but I can still have some fun with the film. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.